When Leonard opened his grandfather's logbooks, he expected stories of long hauls and fuel stops. But what he found were riddles, roads that didn't exist, places that vanished, and one word that kept coming up: the bench. What was his grandfather hiding, and why did no one ever talk about it? Leonard Reynolds wiped the sweat from his forehead with the sleeve of his flannel shirt. His grandfather's garage hadn't been touched since the funeral 3 weeks earlier, and Leonard was the only one who seemed willing to sort through it. Harry Reynolds had been a trucker for 42 years. He was the kind of man with stories that came out like they'd been rehearsed over miles of open road. Leonard had grown up hearing them. About long hauls through Wyoming snowstorms, about diners with the best coffee in the country, and about people who'd helped him out when no one else would. But Harry had never talked about what he did every July. He just packed a small duffel, filled a thermos, and disappeared for 3 days. When he came back, he was quieter than usual, reflective. Leonard had always meant to ask where he went. Now it was too late. He knelt beside an old metal filing cabinet in the back of the garage. The drawers stuck from years of disuse, but inside the bottom one, behind a stack of maintenance receipts and trucking magazines, he found them, 3 worn logbooks, leather-bound, with cracked spines and Harry's initials pressed faintly into the covers. Leonard carried them to the workbench, brushed off the dust, and opened the first one. At first glance, they looked like any other trucking logs, dates, mileages, fuel stops. But the deeper he read, the stranger it got. Entries listed towns that didn't match any zip codes he recognized. Places like Glen Pike Junction or Orchard's Turn. One stop was marked as Cabin 8, back of the Silver Fork lot. Ask for Jimmy, tip well. Another entry was a simple line: July 17th, the bench. Every year. No exceptions. He flipped to another logbook. Same date, different year. Again, July 17th, the bench. Coffee and boots. No mention of what it meant. No location. Just that. Leonard sat back on the stool, thumbing the page, heart ticking faster. His grandfather had made that same entry year after year. Same day, same phrase, and never once talked about it. That night, Leonard brought the books home. He couldn't stop thinking about them. He opened online maps, typed in the towns. Nothing. Not even a blip. A few sounded close to real places, but the roads didn't match. He even searched through old DOT maps and trucking forums. Still nothing. The next morning, over breakfast, he brought it up to his mom. "Did Grandpa ever mention the bench to you?" he asked. She blinked, holding her coffee midair. "No." "Why?" "It's in his logbooks. Every July 17th. Just those words." She frowned. "I always thought those little trips were just his way of getting out." Said he needed air. Time to himself. "He never told me where he went." "He told anyone?" "Not that I know of." She looked down at her mug. "But I do remember once, maybe 10 years ago, I was helping him pack and asked if he was going to see someone. He just said, 'Not someone. Everyone.'" Then he smiled and walked off. Leonard nodded slowly. The more he read, the more he felt like he wasn't just looking at miles and towns. The logbooks were a map, but not the kind with coordinates. He stood in the doorway later that day, staring at the tarp-covered shape at the edge of the driveway. The truck. Harry's 1984 Chevy. Red, with white panels, rust curling around the wheel wells like ivy. The tires were flat. The bench seat was torn, but it had made it across the country more than once. Leonard pulled off the tarp. He wasn't the kind of guy who made impulsive decisions. He worked 6 days a week at a local garage, paid his bills, didn't cause waves. But lately, everything had started to feel stuck. Like his life was a loop: coffee, cars, silence, sleep. The shop's owner had offered him a manager position, and he hadn't said yes or no, because he didn't know what he wanted. But he knew this. If he didn't follow these roads now, he'd regret it. This wasn't about nostalgia. It was about understanding the man who raised him, and maybe figuring out something about himself along the way. Leonard spent the next 3 days fixing up the truck, replacing belts, draining fluids, patching wires. It was work that came naturally. the kind of labor that let his hands move while his mind wandered. Each night, he read more of the logbooks. He began charting the entries on paper, trying to see a pattern. The dates always clustered around July. The places? Rural, obscure, often bordering state lines. On the 5th day, he packed the truck with a cooler, tools, a journal, and the logbooks. His mom handed him a bag of snacks and an old denim jacket that had belonged to Harry. "You sure about this?" she asked. "Nope," he said with a crooked smile. "But I can't not go." She nodded. "If he left you this trail, maybe he wanted you to find something." He fired up the truck. The engine sputtered, coughed, then growled to life. The smell of fuel and dust filled the air. Leonard looked in the rearview mirror one last time, at the house, the driveway, the life he knew, and then pulled onto the road. The first entry in the logbook read, "Rock Hollow, mile 413. Gas station with the leaning sign." No coordinates, no map, just the promise of something lost, and the chance to bring it back. The sun was low on the horizon when Leonard pulled onto what the logbook simply called Mile 413. No road sign, no GPS signal, just a gravel split-off Highway 81, hidden between two sycamores that arched like gatekeepers over the path. His tires kicked up dust as the old Chevy rumbled forward, the bench seat creaking under his weight. The world felt quieter here. No billboards, no other cars, just the faint rattle of tools in the back and the low hum of the engine. After 3 miles, the path opened into a clearing. On the left, a building that might once have been a gas station stood half-swallowed by kudzu. Its roof had caved in, and one pump lay rusted on its side. A metal sign nearby, long since illegible, leaned against a post, the last letter of gas barely visible through the flaking red paint. Opposite that was what remained of a diner, just a concrete foundation and a rusted frame where the front sign had once hung. Twisting vines covered the skeleton of the building, curling around what had once been a counter and booths. And on the far end of the clearing, sitting on a weathered porch that belonged to a house older than the pavement itself, was a man. He wore faded overalls, boots caked with dry mud, and a mesh-backed cap that looked older than Leonard. A cigarette burned low in his hand, and his gray beard twitched with the breeze. "You're late," the man said, without standing. Leonard stepped out of the truck slowly, confused. "Sorry." The man gestured vaguely toward the ruins. "Last guy came through in 2016. He was late too." Leonard blinked. "I'm just trying to follow a route. Harry Reynolds was my grandfather. I found his old logbooks." The man squinted, then broke into a smile that pulled the lines on his face into deep creases. "Harry, damn. He still had that truck." Leonard nodded. "Runs like it wants to stop. But it got me here." The man chuckled. "Name's Virgil. I drove with your grandpa back in '82, before that company in Nebraska shut down. Harry never missed a July. Always brought black coffee in a thermos that leaked." Leonard stepped closer, heart picking up. "Do you know what the bench is?" Virgil leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "That ain't something you find with GPS. But if you've made it this far, you're on the right trail." He pointed toward the overgrowth. "Back in the day, this was Rock Hollow. Diner had the best pie west of the Mississippi. That station used to run all night for truckers passing through. Then the bypass came and the town dried up. Nobody came back except us. Us. Old-timers. Harry included. Every year we'd pick a route, a quiet one, and meet. Same day. No announcements. Just the bench. If you knew, you knew." Leonard pulled out the logbook. "But the route doesn't make sense. Some of the towns don't even show up on maps." "That's because they ain't towns anymore," Virgil said. "Places die. Signs fall. But Harry always said fences outlive maps. You want to find the bench? Follow the fences." That's what he did. Leonard stayed a while longer. Virgil didn't offer much more, just a few laughs, some stories about Harry getting stuck in a snowbank outside Boise, and a knowing nod when Leonard said he'd keep going. Back in the truck, Leonard pulled out his phone and opened the private group he'd recently joined, the Iron Trail Stories from the Road. It was mostly old photos of rigs and recollections about classic routes, but he figured some of these folks might remember places like Rock Hollow. He uploaded a photo of the gas station's remains and wrote, "Following my grandfather's logbooks. This was Rock Hollow. Anyone ever heard of it?" He didn't expect much. He tossed the phone on the seat and kept driving. The next morning, parked outside a closed grain mill in a town called Elbin's Rest, another name from the logbook, Leonard opened his phone and was stunned. Dozens of comments. "I remember Rock Hollow. That station had the best ham sandwiches. Used to be a bench under a sycamore out back. You're getting close." And then one that made him stop. Jeanette H. "Harry Reynolds. I haven't heard that name in a long time. We used to stop together in Glenmore Pass. He taught me how to tie chains in the snow. Tell me more about the route you're on." Leonard clicked her profile. The photo was recent. A woman in her 70s, white hair pulled back, standing in front of a Peterbilt with a faded logo. Her cover photo was of a winding mountain road. He messaged her directly, "Jeanette, I'm Leonard, Harry's grandson. I'm retracing his logbooks." She replied almost immediately, "Then you've got quite the journey ahead. I'll help where I can." He was important to me. Over the next few days, Leonard followed the logbook from place to place. Old feed stores, collapsed way stations, long-abandoned rest stops where the only signs left were faded silhouettes on cracked brick. And each time, something clicked. A smell. A phrase someone had told him once. A melody from an old trucker radio station still echoing from a local AM band. In one spot, he found a piece of fence with initials HR and JH carved into the wood. He traced them with his fingers. He didn't need to ask who JH was. He posted that too. Jeanette responded with a simple, "We used to sit there for hours. Never needed to talk. Just listened to the highway." That night, Leonard lay in the back of the truck, staring at the stars above the Nebraska plains. He didn't know exactly where he was going next, but for the first time, he didn't feel like he was chasing ghosts. He was following memories, ones his grandfather left on purpose. And someone else out there still remembered them too. 3 days. That's all the logbook said he had left. Leonard turned the last page of his grandfather's final log, and there it was again, scrawled in Harry's tight, familiar print. July 17th. Bring coffee. Wear boots. Don't talk. Just listen. He stared at the words in the dim light of the cab, parked off the side of a quiet Missouri backroad, heart pressing against his ribs like it knew something he didn't. Jeanette had messaged again that morning. "If you're still going, and I hope you are, don't try to find it on a map. Trust your eyes. Look for the wooden arrow." And so he did. The next 2 days passed in a blur of valleys and switchbacks as Leonard entered the Ozarks. Each road he took felt smaller, quieter, like the world was falling away behind him. Cell signal dropped to 0. The GPS screen blinked out. The only guide he had was instinct, and his grandfather's voice echoing through faint memories. By noon on the 17th, the old Chevy was crawling along a dirt road so narrow the trees brushed both mirrors. The truck lurched with every rut and rock, but Leonard kept going. Then, just as he was wondering if he'd missed something, it appeared. A simple wooden board nailed to a fence post, hand-painted in white. "Bench." He stopped the truck. No other sign or instructions. Just the arrow. Leonard turned onto the path. It twisted downhill through dense oak and hickory, branches catching the sides of the truck like fingers pulling him forward. Then, without warning, the trees opened into a wide clearing ringed by grass, dirt, and thyme. And there it was, a weathered wooden bench beneath a massive sycamore, its bark pale and dappled like old skin. Around it, 5 trucks were parked in a semicircle, older rigs, each one different but all spotless, polished with pride. One had flags tucked into its mirrors. Another had a wooden cross tied to the grill. No one was speaking, no engines running, just silence, deep and respectful, the kind that didn't need to be explained. Leonard parked off to the side, grabbed the thermos of black coffee he'd brewed that morning, and stepped out. His boots crunched over the gravel. No one turned right away, but they had seen him. A tall man with a long white braid and a denim vest gave him a nod. Another leaned against the hood of a Peterbilt, eyes shaded by dark glasses. A third, shorter, round, and wrapped in flannel despite the heat, gave him a small salute. And then he saw her. Jeanette. She stood by the sycamore, silver hair in a braid over one shoulder, a patch-covered trucker's jacket hanging off her frame like it had been worn 1,000 miles. When she saw Leonard, her eyes lit up with something between recognition and memory. "You made it," she said gently. Leonard swallowed, nodded. "I wasn't sure I would. He left you enough breadcrumbs." She motioned toward the bench. "You brought coffee?" He handed her the thermos. "He always did that," she said, almost to herself. "Every year, no matter how hot it got." They sat on the bench in silence. For a while, Leonard just listened. To the wind, the creak of trucks cooling in the sun, the way the trees whispered like they were part of the ceremony. Then Jeanette began to speak. "Harry was stubborn," she said. "Quiet, but not because he didn't have anything to say. He just believed some things were better shown than said." Leonard nodded slowly. "I didn't know he wrote songs." Jeanette's smile tugged at the edges of old joy. "He wrote them in margins, on diner napkins. Once, he played one for me on a harmonica he kept in his glove box. It wasn't good," she laughed, "but it was honest." She looked out over the clearing. "He started this place. Not the location, that changes every few years, but the idea. A place for the road to remember itself. For the ones who didn't make it back. And for the ones who did, but left a piece of themselves behind." Leonard felt his throat tighten. "He never told me any of this. He wouldn't. That wasn't the point. You had to come to it. You had to earn it." Across the clearing, the other truckers began to gather in a loose circle around the bench. Jeanette stood and nodded for Leonard to join. No one raised their voices. There were no speeches, just short, clear sentences passed one by one. Names of people who had driven with them, laughed with them, helped them fix a flat at 3 a.m. or offered a slice of pie when no one else did. One man named Roy recited the same phrase after every name. "Still rolling. Just not here." When it was Leonard's turn, he hesitated. Then he said, "Harry Reynolds. My grandfather." And every head bowed. They stayed until dusk. No one rushed. The trucks didn't rumble back to life all at once. Some stayed idling. Others pulled away slowly, fading into the woods like ghosts. Jeanette touched Leonard's arm. "He'd be proud. You honored the road the right way." He looked at her. "Why didn't he bring me here?" She smiled. "Because you weren't ready. But now you are." Leonard stood by the bench long after the others had gone. The last light filtered through the sycamore leaves, and for a moment, he could almost hear Harry's voice, low, gravelly, saying nothing and everything at once. He picked up a small rock from the ground, turned it over in his palm, then placed it gently on the bench. Then he climbed into the truck and drove back up the road, headlights cutting through the trees. He didn't know what came next, but felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. Something you can't find on maps, but is built from memory. The bench was empty now. The last diesel hum had faded into the trees an hour earlier, and Leonard remained, sitting with his elbows on his knees and his eyes on the ground. The grass swayed gently around him, stirred by the breeze that always seemed to find its way to this place. He didn't feel the need to say anything aloud. Somehow, everything had already been said, by the presence of those men and women, by the stillness, by the ritual of it all. It wasn't about explaining or recording. It was about carrying it forward. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small spiral notebook, his own logbook, started on the second day of the trip. With the fading light, he wrote a single line. July 17th. Sat at the bench. I listened. Then he closed the book and tucked it away. Back in Kansas City, the rhythm of daily life returned, almost. The garage smelled the same. Burnt rubber, sweat, engine oil. The radio still crackled classic rock through old speakers. But Leonard felt different inside the space. His coworkers noticed. He wasn't distracted or restless anymore. He was focused, like someone that finally understood the value of the questions. One afternoon, while reorganizing a cluttered drawer of parts receipts, he looked around the break room. 2 young apprentices, both barely 20, were arguing about which tool did what. Across from them sat Don, a retired driver who worked part-time delivering rebuilt transmissions, sipping coffee quietly. And just like that, the idea clicked. That night, Leonard stayed late. He outlined a simple program on a whiteboard, the Harry Initiative, pairing retired drivers and mechanics with young apprentices. They would be their mentors, people who understood what couldn't be taught in manuals. Patience, pride, storytelling, and when to stop and just listen. The shop owner loved it. Within weeks, old drivers started showing up again. Guys who hadn't turned a wrench in years, leaning on the counter, telling war stories and lending a hand. Leonard didn't need the manager position anymore. Naturally, he had found a purpose, and this was what he valued most. Outside of work, Leonard found himself returning to the logbooks. At night, he'd sit at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee and the smell of grease still clinging to his sleeves, carefully turning each page of his grandfather's handwriting. Some things, he felt, belonged to paper, to oil-stained fingers, to silence. But the feeling those pages gave him, the weight of time, the reverence, the stillness between words, he wanted to pass that on. He started writing something new about the road. Thought about the spaces between mile markers, about the kind of quiet you only understood after 10 hours behind the wheel. He called it The Long Way Home. It was short, just stories, fragments, and reflections. Nothing about destinations. He didn't need maps or names. At the back of each copy, he left a single blank page titled, What the Road Taught Me. And on the inside cover he wrote, For those who still drive with respect, you'll know what this means, if it's meant for you. He left them behind quietly, a stack at a tire shop, one on the counter of a diner, tucked behind a salt shaker, never more than one, never explained, and somehow that was enough. Now and then, someone messaged the garage, or stopped him at the pump, just to say the words felt familiar, like something they'd almost forgotten. Jeanette started visiting once in a while. They'd sit outside by the old Chevy, now repainted but still showing its rust like a badge. She brought pie sometimes, or stories Harry had never shared with anyone else. About little kindnesses, about quiet detours, about the man, not the legend. He didn't want attention, she said once, resting her hand on the hood. He just didn't want the good things to die with him. Leonard nodded. They won't. And he meant it. One evening, pulling into a rest stop outside Tulsa, Leonard noticed something taped to the wall above the coffee station. A handwritten note, short and simple. Still out there. Still listening. And Leonard knew exactly what it meant. The road didn't need to remember everything. Just the right things. This story reminds us that some legacies aren't just written in medals or headlines. Sometimes they are entire tracks, laughter, and a wooden bench under the trees. Would you follow the route if it meant understanding someone you loved? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to embrace the journey. See you in the next video.